13 weapons, 40 new and returning characters, hundreds of new puzzles to solve, and 15 larger-than-life 3D levels. Earthworm Jim 3D. Get in, or get out.
Nearly everything in that commercial was either a lie or a gross exaggeration. Buckle up for this one, folks.
Go, Ruby! Let's kick cow!
Welcome back to a long overdue episode of Retro Rampage. I've had this one in the works for a while, but I think the time is finally right for me to return to the Earthworm Jim series and look at one of its most divisive games. This game was so hated that I used to always see it on top 10 lists of the worst games of all time, so I've got my work cut out for me today. Before that though, it's been a while since I've talked about Earthworm Jim, so let's quickly recap on some of the earlier games in the series. The original Earthworm Jim is one of my favorite games of all time. Everything about it just fell into place for me. The excellent animation that made it feel like a Saturday morning cartoon, the bizarre level themes that kept you guessing what was going to come next, the phenomenal soundtrack composed by Mark Miller, it all just came together perfectly. Originally intended to be a Genesis exclusive, Earthworm Jim found its way to every major game platform of the time, and it's seen countless re-releases in the years since. My original video goes into more detail on the major differences between all the versions, but most of them were very competent and only a few left a lot to be desired. The wide availability meant that a lot of people got to play this game, and before anybody or even the developers themselves knew it, Earthworm Jim had assembled a nice little cult following. I'm sure the TV show and the action figures helped with that. Earthworm Jim 2, released 1 year later, received similar positive reception. The sequel mixed things up even more by often changing the type of gameplay from stage to stage, and introducing plenty of new weapons for Jim to use. I agree with the general consensus that it's another excellent platformer, though the game's inconsistency in its gameplay leads me to slightly prefer the first game. Still though, you can't go wrong with either of these games. Just be careful which versions you play, as they all have slight differences, but if you're watching this, then you've probably already heard me ramble about that. By the end of 1996, the Earthworm Jim series had 2 excellent games in its lineup, plus merchandise and the TV show. Things were looking pretty bright, but what happened next? I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's get to it and jump right into Earthworm Jim 3D. Earthworm Jim 3 for the NES, or Famicom to be specific. If you couldn't tell already, this is a bootleg. Developed by the infamous Hummer team, who were known for making unlicensed NES ports of 16-bit games. Some of their more notable works include Somari the Adventurer, that bizarre Sonic clone where it's Mario running around instead, and the kind of impressive NES port of Super Mario World, the one where Mario goes from 0 to 60 in less than a second. So what we have here is an attempt, and that's the key word here, to port over a few levels from the SNES version of Earthworm Jim back down to the NES. Some of you were upset that I didn't include this in my original Earthworm Jim video, and don't get me wrong, I considered it, but I decided to only focus on official ports of the game, which this is obviously not. With that said though, this is honestly kind of impressive. These people managed to get assets from the Super Nintendo running on the NES, and if you can look past the obvious jank and decrease in frames of animation, they succeeded. I find this works better as a proof of concept than anything else, as the game is painfully short. It only has 6 stages, each of which is beatable in only a minute or two. The levels only use assets from New Junk City, What the Heck, and For Pete's Sake, so a lot of levels were left out of this game. Unlike the Game Boy and Game Gear versions, which allow you to shoot and whip depending on whether you press or hold the B button, this game lets you cycle between the two with the select button, which is really a detriment in For Pete's Sake. I love this badly colored image of Jim that appears before the start of each level. This is normally where the level name would be displayed, but the game waits to do that until after the image fades out. There's not much point to it, but it does make me chuckle. Surprisingly, the bosses from each level here are represented relatively well, including Chuck, the evil snowman, Evil the cat, and for some reason the cyborg chicken is the final boss, as it appears at the end of For Pete's Sake and takes like 1,000 hits. There's no ending either, so this really does work best as a proof of concept. I probably won't ever go back and play this again, but I'll give them credit here. The fact that this is kinda playable is an impressive feat, and it does show just how popular the series became since the devs thought there was enough of a market for an 8-bit demake of the first game. Only play this if you're bored or you're like me and you've played the original around 3,000 times. There's also a bootleg NES version of Earthworm Jim 2. 2 of them actually, but I'm not playing those right now. I've spent enough time on pirated games today, and these look way worse anyway, so no thanks. But alright, enough about that already. You probably want to hear me talk about this, right? Well, I hope you're comfortable, because I've got some history with this game and a lot to say about it. First of all, though, I should probably talk about how this game came to be, because the development of Earthworm Jim 3D was kind of a roller coaster. And if you know anything about me, you know I love talking about roller coasters. So let's get started. Making a third game in the Earthworm Jim series was kind of a no-brainer in 1996. The series was fresh off its second installment, which had just launched on PlayStation and Sega Saturn at the time. But it might surprise you to hear that a third Earthworm Jim game was not a high priority for the team at Shiny Entertainment. Since being purchased by their publisher Interplay, Shiny had implemented a strict no-sequels policy as a way to keep their fans guessing as to what they would create next. Shiny was riding high after the success of Earthworm Jim, and it was at this point that studio founder Dave Perry, perhaps believing that this success would carry over to future games, sold the rights to Earthworm Jim to Interplay. A dumbfounding move that Perry would later come to regret. This change in ownership is how Jim was able to appear in other Interplay games at the time, most famously in the much-maligned Clay Fighter 63 1/3. But Earthworm Jim was now in the hands of Interplay, and with the team at Shiny moving on to games like MDK and Wild 9, it would fall to a new team to create the next Earthworm Jim adventure. That's where Viz comes in, or Viz Interactive as they were known. The Scotland-based developer had only created one game at this point in time, that being the often forgotten Heads on PC, but perhaps due to some sweet-talking between the founder of Viz and the higher-ups at Interplay, they were given the reins of the next Earthworm Jim project. A gamble to be sure, and what followed was a tumultuous development cycle that isn't very well archived, but is well known for being a textbook case of development hell. From the beginning, it was decided that this would be a 3D game, as it was all the rage at the time, especially after Super Mario 64 took the world by storm. However, to keep the scale and cost of the game small, it was going to be a PC exclusive. This plan didn't last long, as Interplay quickly mandated Nintendo 64 and PlayStation ports to be released as well, and Viz were also responsible for developing those versions on top of the base PC game. 3 separate versions, 2 of which were for platforms the studio had never worked on before. The workload had quickly ballooned into something that was far too much for the small staff at Viz to handle. Evidence of this troubled development cycle can be seen in pretty much all of the pre-release material for the game, most of which looks nothing like the finished product. There are whole areas and sub-levels in these trailers that are nowhere to be seen in the final game, and these even appear in screenshots used in advertisements. Cut aspects include a section where Jim rides on his pocket rocket, a level set in a supermarket, and a completely different art style from the final release. The PlayStation version was eventually cancelled, with N64 and PC remaining as the platforms of choice. After 3 years of development and more delays than you can count, Earthworm Jim 3D was finally released in November 1999. The release did not go well, and the game was overshadowed almost immediately by other games that came out the same month, if not before, like Donkey Kong 64, Rayman 2, and of course Sonic Adventure. Critics absolutely destroyed the game, and it was not received favorably by audiences either. Soon after, the game faded into obscurity and is often cited as the game responsible for killing the entire Earthworm Jim series. But is the game really that bad? All this troubled development and behind-the-scenes drama are things I wasn't aware of when I walked into my local retro game store in 2009 and bought it. I spent a lot of time on it too, always playing it after school and late into the night. I always found it funny how it was published by Rockstar Games, at least in North America. This was before they were well known for Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. The yellow cartridge is an unusual choice. I always mix it up with Donkey Kong 64 when I go to grab a cartridge, but maybe that was deliberate. But let's play this thing already. Just so you know, I'm going to be using footage from both the N64 and the PC version of the game, but I'll mostly be using PC footage since you can run that version in 1080p. It's a shame it stretches the image to 16:9, but you're watching this after the fact, so I can just... There we go. Image quality is definitely better here since over on the N64, even when recorded with S-Video, it looks like this, so I'll be using N64 footage sparingly. But it's finally time. After all these years of having a terrible reputation, is Earthworm Jim 3D actually worth playing? It's time to pretend I'm in middle school again. Let's do it. Earthworm Jim 3D starts off with a happy accordion-playing Jim getting crushed by a fridge, and then by a cow. The cow makes sense since it's been a running gag since the first game, but the fridge is something this game tries to introduce. On the 64, Jim gets crushed with the N64 logo instead, which is a nice touch. So, what's the riveting story of this game? Jim's been hit by another falling cow, something he should be pretty accustomed to by now, but for some reason this time has put Jim into a coma. As Jim's superego, you have to journey through each of Jim's 4 brains and recollect his marbles. Yeah, Jim has quite literally lost his marbles. And before anyone mentions that earthworms don't have 4 brains, this is apparently something that resulted from the light speed evolution that took place when the super suit first landed on Jim, and it was mentioned in the cartoon several times.
I'll solve this problem with my 4 hyper-intelligent brains. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm itchy. Where are the girls? Okay.
Speaking of the cartoon, Jim's voice actor from the show, Dan Castellaneta, returns to voice Jim here, and he does a fantastic job as usual. It really sounds like he's having fun in the role.
And it's a really big one!
Jim's conscience takes the form of Peter Puppy, who explains the situation, and from here on it's pretty much your standard 90s collect-a-thon platformer. From the central brain hub here, we can access Jim's 4 brains: memory, happiness, fear, and fantasy, each of which contains 2 or more stages and a boss fight. And what shiny gold collectibles will we be searching for throughout the game? Golden udders. Because cows. How creative. Only memory is unlocked at the start. You need a certain number of udders and marbles to unlock the other brains, so let's head down to memory and get a move on. The udders are bagpipes. What else can udders do that I've never been told about? Don't answer that. When you go down into each brain, you can talk to the sacred cow of contemplation, who explains what boss is presiding over each brain, as well as the situation in each level. The first brain, memory, is overtaken with memories of a farmyard war Jim witnessed as a young worm, so both levels here have very militant themes. Let's jump into the first level, coup d'etat. Yeah, there's a lot of puns in this game. Here we have a chicken coop under siege from an invading army of cows. Now that we're into the game proper, let's go over some moves. Jim is capable of doing most things he could do in the earlier games. He can run, jump, use his own body as a whip, which is pretty much just a really short-range melee attack now, and of course fire his plasma blaster, but there are some new moves as well. The helicopter head move returns, but this time it's used to slightly extend your jump instead of slowing your descent. It doesn't look like much, but trust me, it can be very helpful while platforming. Jim can crouch with the B button, and jumping out of your crouching pose does a new super jump that can be useful for reaching high platforms. Moving while crouched allows Jim to do a dodge roll, which is your main method of avoiding attack. But you don't even need to roll because I kid you not, every single projectile in this game can be avoided simply by ducking. Seriously, hold the B button and watch as enemy shots sail harmlessly overhead. If you ever need a moment to get your bearings but there are enemies nearby, just hold B and you'll be completely fine. As soon as you start playing though, you'll notice the biggest problem with Earthworm Jim 3D: the camera. It's a textbook case of an early 3D game camera that has no idea where to go or what to focus on. You thought the camera in Super Mario 64 aged badly? Well, just give this game a shot. The camera here has no idea what it's supposed to be doing. It swings around wildly, never gives you a good view of enemies or terrain, and it can even get stuck on certain parts of the level sometimes. Unless you're jumping or ducking, your right thumb will always be on the C buttons because you'll be fighting against the camera every step of the way. You better get used to it though, because we're only on the first level. Early on in Coup d'etat, we get to launch a bunch of fridges, because Jim launched a cow in the first game, and this is funny too, I guess? Where do the fridges land? Just hang tight, we're gonna find out soon enough. As you head further into the level, you'll have to dodge egg grenades rolling downhill as you collect Jim's marbles. Think of the marbles like the coins in Super Mario 64, as they heal 1% of your health for each one you collect. But instead of getting a star for collecting 100, the marbles are required for completion of the game, and there's exactly 100 of them in each level. So while you're fighting against the camera, you'd better be looking around as well, because some of these can be easy to miss. If you screw up and die, guess what? You're back to 0, and you have to collect all the marbles over again. Thankfully, you don't need to collect all 100 in each level just to progress. Getting around 70 to 80 marbles will be more than enough to keep unlocking stages, so getting all 100 is mostly for completion. So we're running around whipping hamsters until they blow up. These guys helped Jim and down the tubes, and now we're making them blow up? That's not very nice. Once you climb all the way to the top of the level and take down the giant bomb-laying chicken, that's more or less it for this level. The next area, Barn to be Wild, is definitely a much more open level with more areas to explore. This swamp introduces one of my most hated aspects of the game: quicksand. It's all over the place in Earthworm Jim 3D, and you'll have to jump right in to collect marbles and get to new areas. Sink too far in and you'll start taking damage really fast. Unfortunately, I swear you have to take damage to get some of these marbles since you hardly have any time to make it back to safe ground before your health starts to drain. Some areas of quicksand actually do have a floor so you won't take damage, but there's nothing visually distinct about them to help tell them apart from the bottomless areas, so approach all quicksand with caution. Let's talk about weapons for a minute. Earthworm Jim 3D handles weapons a bit differently than the previous games. Individual weapons that you can switch between are gone. Now, each level has 1 or 2 weapons that are unique to that stage and that stage only. You can obtain these weapons from vending machines found around the stages, but unfortunately you can't replenish your ammo until you use up the ammo you currently have. So if you want to resupply before running into a new area, you have to mash the fire button to waste all your remaining ammo before the vending machine will let you get more. As for the weapons themselves, well, they vary in quality. You'll always have Jim's trusty plasma blaster by default, and it gets the job done, but the stage-specific weapons pack more of a punch. Coup d'etat has the leprechaun, which shoots out, well, a leprechaun. He'll run around for a bit before homing in on the nearest enemy. It works well enough, but you only get a few shots with it, and it's not exactly fast. Barn to be Wild has the egg sniper, which speaks for itself. You shoot eggs and it lets you go into the first-person mode to take out the pesky hedgehogs on the rooftops. Midway through the level, you'll gain access to the Cow Army's secret base, and inside you get a new weapon, a meat cleaver. Is this gonna do what I think it's gonna do? Oh yeah, it is. You decapitate the cows with the meat cleaver. I can't believe it's actually something you do in the game, but there it is. It just happened. We went from launching cows into the air to carrying them through the level, and now we're just killing them. This is dark even for Earthworm Jim, but I guess a cow is the reason Jim's in a coma, so this must be pretty cathartic for him. You better get used to all the decapitation because that's all you'll be doing for the rest of this level. Even while going through the training course, you're still slicing up cows. I guess they have a lot of expendable soldiers. For some reason, in the PC version, Jim never wants to let go of the ropes. You have to go to the end of the rope to let go. This issue isn't there in the N64 version, so I have no idea what's going on here. At the end of the level, we rescue Colonel Pluckett, who was kidnapped in the previous stage. And what happens to him? Yep, there's our first fridge. I told you we'd be seeing them again. Almost done with memory, but now it's time for our first boss fight, and it's against Jim's old nemesis, Psychro. Jim is riding on a pig for some reason, while Psychro is in a tank, keeping with the war theme of this brain. So we're riding this pig around the arena, and you might think that you have to pick up these missiles and shoot Psychro in order to win. Well, you're partially right. All the blue marbles in the arena have to be collected for you to win, and there's still 100 of them. The actual way to win is to shoot Psychro so he drops the marbles he's carrying. Keep doing that until you have all 100 and you win. That probably sounds pretty simple, but trust me, it's not. These boss fights have some of the worst controls imaginable. The pig turns so slowly, so it's a pain to orient yourself properly to collect the marbles before Psychro comes in and just grabs them all up. And while you're trying to do that, Psychro is going to be shooting at you too. You can thankfully dodge the missiles, but it's not exactly easy. You have to jump just before the missile hits you. If you do it right, the missile will just pass on by. Of course, this is easier said than done, and in order to get the timing down, you'll probably be taking a lot of hits, which not only cost you health, but you lose marbles as well. This is often considered the lowest point of the game, and it's easy to see why. And guess what? It's not just this boss fight that's like this. It's all of them. Yes, every single boss fight in the game has the exact same type of gameplay. It's always the stupid porkboarding mechanic at the end of every brain, so you'd better get used to these awful controls. For every boss you beat, though, you get no fewer than 5 golden udders, which seems overly generous, but I guess they did run out of time to make more levels to put those udders in. Whatever. Done with memory, let's keep going. The second brain is Jim's happiness, and of course, it's all food-themed. The sacred cow of contemplation informs Jim that the brain has been invaded by Fatty Roswell, an alien burger chef who I think is an original character for this game. You know, because the Earthworm Jim series didn't have enough established villains that might show up in Jim's brains, but I digress. The first level here is Lord of the Fries, a swamp made of nothing but cheese and french fries. No wonder this is Jim's happiness. I'd never want to leave either. We just need some hot dogs and I'm all set. Early in the level we meet King Gherkin, who Fatty Roswell has captured. A running theme in the Happiness Brain is that Fatty has captured various characters to use them as ingredients in an ultimate burger he's working on. As you explore the level, you'll activate switches which will eventually free the Cucumber King. Lord of the Fries brings back the zip lines which were all over the place back in New Junk City, so it's nice to see them back. Another returning mechanic is pulling Jim up on ropes to avoid enemy contact. These are some examples of mechanics from the 2D games which translated just fine into 3D. It's in this level where you really might notice another one of my biggest complaints with this game. Jim's top running speed is painfully slow. It's not that big of a deal when you're in a confined area, but anytime you enter a large open space or room, you're just wishing Jim would speed the heck up and get a move on. This can add a lot of time to your playthroughs, and it can get pretty boring wandering through these large open areas, just waiting for Jim to reach the other side. Most of the time in this level, you'll be fighting these robots to obtain key cards, which will let you go to the next room. There's some perilous platforming throughout above the melted cheese swamp, and you can also find balloons hidden around the levels which will inflate Jim's head just like in Earthworm Jim 2. Collect all of the blue marbles within the time limit to get another golden udder. At the end, you'll find a somewhat hidden room where Jim meets the spiritual hot sauce, who tells Jim of his destiny to become Lord of the Fries. This is where you obtain this level's special weapon, the pea shooter. It functions pretty much identically to the egg gun from a few levels back, and you'll need it to shoot all the holy potatoes of truth hidden around the swamp to obtain one of this level's golden udders. So now you have to go back through all the rooms you cleared and look for these potatoes, and some of them can be easy to miss. Along your travels, you'll inevitably hit the final switch to free King Gherkin, but he doesn't get very far. Poor guy. The next level is Are You Hungry Tonight, and this one took me forever my first time through. Unlike the other levels, we actually start this one with a special weapon, a laser gun that can ricochet off walls, and Jim keeps the weapon through the whole level since it automatically recharges. Early on, we run into Elvis, who's being held captive because Fatty Roswell wants to use him in his ultimate burger, so we've got to find a way to get him out of there. Most of this level will have you running around gunning down alien burger chefs, but the reason it took me so long at first is because this is the most expansive level so far. There are multiple floors to explore here, each with their own objectives, and you'll be able to get to them all after unlocking the elevator. The bottom floor introduces a huge vertical climb that you'll have to ascend by using these canisters to fart rocket yourself up. This is what we've come to, folks. Fart jokes were always more of a Boogerman thing instead of Earthworm Jim, but this is a mechanic that comes back several more times in the game. The higher you go, the more nerve-wracking it gets, because don't forget, there's fall damage in this game. So one mistake is almost certainly instant death, and it's not like the platforming is easy either. Thanks to the wonderful camera, you'll often not be able to get a good perspective to line up your jumps, and some of these jumps are really tight. You'll be using the helicopter head a lot here. I often find myself going into first-person mode just to get my bearings, and don't forget to grab those marbles while you're making your way up. There's nothing worse than being almost at the top, only to look down and realize you missed some marbles, so now you have to risk fall damage in order to go back down and collect them. Elsewhere in the level, you'll be shooting pots and pans on the walls to free yourself from a glass enclosure, and using that elevator to cover every single floor to make sure you didn't miss a marble. Oh, okay, goodbye. Finally, we free Elvis from his prison, and he starts making his way to us. So now you have to escort him along a dangerous path, clearing out enemies along the way and whipping him over gaps in the floor. There's something familiar about this whole thing. That's right, it's For Pete's Sake from the first game, but nowhere near as fun. This is something you've probably noticed about Earthworm Jim 3D by this point. All of the game's attempts at humor are just lesser imitations of things the first two games already did. You had the fridges launching in the first level, which is just another version of launching the cow, the hamsters, which are from down the tubes, the balloons inflating Jim's head are taken straight out of Earthworm Jim 2, the pork boarding might even be a reference to Anything But Tangerines where you're carrying pigs, and now this segment with Elvis. It's almost like Earthworm Jim 3D is afraid to do its own thing because the developers knew it would be in the shadow of the first two games. There's nothing wrong with paying tribute to a previous game in the series, but this just comes off as an imitation of what made Earthworm Jim so great in the first place. And as soon as it feels like the game is finally doing its own thing, the stupid fridges come back just to remind you that Earthworm Jim 1 did that part so much better. Anyway, once you get Elvis to the end, it turns out that all your effort was for nothing because he gets turned into a burger anyway. And to the game's credit, some of the writing can be pretty funny, so there's always that. Let's get out of here, this level was never one of my favorites. Speaking of not being one of my favorites, it's time for us to fight Fatty Roswell, and if you thought Psychro was hard, you haven't seen anything yet. Quick aside here, like a lot of people who have played this, I first played it on the N64 where I found this fight to be a marginal step up in difficulty, but on the PC version they cranked the difficulty up to 1000. The difference here compared to the Psychro fight is that Fatty can teleport around the arena and his missiles do double the damage. Between the two versions though, the PC version is near impossible because Fatty can't seem to stop teleporting. I was able to hit him roughly once every 5 minutes, so most of that time is me desperately trying to dodge missiles and firing off my own missiles, which don't connect 95% of the time. The 64 version was definitely more bearable, and this is likely a point where a majority of players gave up on this game. That's a huge shame though, because the next brain, Fear, is my favorite area of the game because of its spooky aesthetic, so I'm pretty excited to show you this one. Professor Monkey for a Head has taken over this brain and built a mansion deep within, so we've got to get in there and see what horrors he's cooked up. Yes, I said Professor Monkey for a head and not Evil the Cat, despite what the pre-release screenshots will tell you. Unlike Memory and Happiness, Fear actually contains 4 different levels to go through. You'll first enter into the aforementioned mansion, which gives you access to the first 2 levels. Inside you can run into the elusive Ninja Mouse, who gets crushed with yet another of the flying fridges. The 2 levels found here are pretty much the same level split into 2 parts, Poultrygeist 1 and 2. As the name suggests, you'll be exploring around the spooky haunted mansion taking out ghostly chickens, and this is why Fear is my favorite brain of the game. I'm a sucker for a good haunted level in a video game, and here we get 4 of them. The limited 3D graphics of the time make these areas feel like something straight out of our childhood imaginations, where anything from our nightmares might be hiding just off in the shadows. I have vivid memories of playing these levels late at night in my room back in 7th grade when I first got my Nintendo 64, and they helped cement my love of all things spooky. Poultrygeist 1 is the smaller of the 2 Poultrygeist levels. You'll be running up and down the hallways of the mansion in order to retrieve the head of Professor Monkey for a Head's great aunt, Baroness Beaver for a Head. So yeah, apparently everyone in this family has a random animal attached to their head. The level is pretty small and confined with mostly linear pathways, so there's not a lot of room here to go off the path and explore, but we do meet a recurring enemy here, evil vacuum cleaners, which can only be taken out with this level's special weapon, Banana Dynamite. You only get one at a time, and you have to time it so the vacuum eats the banana right after the fuse ignites. It can be kind of a pain, but it is satisfying to pull off. Then there's this room where the portraits follow you. You have to get them to face the opposite way, and then ever so slightly tilt the analog stick so Jim will creep along and not make the portraits change. Do that and the room changes so you get marbles and an udder. Doing this can be kind of annoying, but just you wait, it gets so much worse later. When you find the Baroness's beaver head, you have to make a mad dash back to the beginning of the level, and this thing wants you dead. On the N64, I had no trouble avoiding the beaver on my run back to the start, but in the PC version, this thing is out for blood. It took me several attempts, but I was eventually able to survive so the Baroness could leave in time for the Elvis reunion party. I hope she likes burgers. Poultrygeist 2 is more of the same, but this time you'll be exploring more of the interior rooms of the mansion. From the central living room, you can use the dynamite to reveal switches in the floor that open up different areas of the level. The one I've always hated is this maze where this chicken is too scared to come out until you clear out all the chicken ghosts. I could never remember where to go in here, and it's so easy to get lost, so I usually just go into random rooms until I find more chickens. These guys can be a pain to take out, since you have to whip the picture frame they spawn out of, otherwise they never stop appearing. It gets worse when you have to hit a switch which lowers a frame, but then you have to remember the right way to go before the frame moves back up. This can be pretty frustrating if you're the impatient type. This other entrance in the bookshelf takes you to one of my favorite areas in the game, a massive library where Jim is shrunken down. You have to do some careful platforming and a strict time limit before platforms disappear, but thankfully you don't die if you fall into a bottomless pit, you just respawn back where you fell from. So it's not like Super Mario 64 where it kicks you out of the level if you fall. This area introduces the next of the game's special weapons, homing rockets. Nothing complicated here, you get 25 rockets and they home in on the nearest target. These are my favorite of the special weapons in the game for practicality alone, and they'll come in handy even more in the next level. Moving across to the second half of Fear, we come to Death Wormed Up, and I have so many mixed feelings about this level. How is it possible for me to love and hate a stage so much? What we have here is a cemetery inhabited by undead disco zombies. Yeah, 'cause disco's dead. On the one hand, I love the aesthetic of a spooky cemetery at night, and the variety of music here does a good job of putting you in the mood for some scary stuff. In fact, let's talk about the music real quick, because most of Earthworm Jim 3D's soundtrack is pretty good stuff. Unlike the first 2 games in the series, the music here was composed by Ged Grimes, best known as the bassist for the rock group Simple Minds, and his work here is really solid stuff. I don't consider the soundtrack quite on the level of Earthworm Jim 1 or 2, but those soundtracks were really tough acts to follow. Jim 3D's soundtrack has that cartoony kind of vibe to it that matches the mood the game is going for, but it also manages to mix in a high variety of musical styles that, for the most part, complement the individual levels nicely. For the soundtrack alone, I highly recommend the PC version of the game, as the N64 version has far fewer music tracks likely due to cartridge space. The N64 version typically has 1 music track per level, but in the PC version, levels can have 3 or more tracks that all play in different areas, so it helps break up the monotony a bit. There's even a few that go completely unused, so I'd suggest listening to the soundtrack playlist on YouTube to hear the whole thing. Back to Death Wormed Up, aesthetics and music aside, this level can be an annoying slog depending on how you play it. Right at the beginning, there's this side room that has you traverse a series of moving platforms over quicksand, and as I established earlier, quicksand in this game is pretty much a death sentence unless you can quickly make your way back to land. Combine that with some of the trickiest platforming in the game, plus the game's notoriously bad camera, and you have a section that will make anybody's hands start sweating. The jumps at the end are some of the tightest in the game. You barely have enough jump distance to make it, even with a perfectly timed helicopter head move. And if you happen to die later in the level, you have to do this whole section all over again, so proceed with caution. Early in the level, Jim meets this disco zombie who tasks him with retrieving his medallion which he gave to the disco champion. This causes 3 gravestones to appear, and you need to interact with all 3 if you want all the marbles, because each one causes a few marbles to fall down in the crypt, which we'll get to in a bit. The first grave is right at the beginning, the third is near the end, but the second is back in the quicksand, so do yourself a favor and talk to the disco guy first so you only have to go in here once. From here on, the level is pretty straightforward. You'll be jumping across sinking gravestones and whipping these statues to get an udder, but then you get to this part. Once you see those rabbit ears sticking out of the ground, you'll know you've reached the worst part of the game. What we have here is a minefield of rabbits. Take one step too close and they'll throw dynamite into your path, which does a good deal of damage. What this means is you have to carefully sneak around by just barely tilting the analog stick, just like that secret room back in Poultrygeist. But unlike that section, which was pretty quick, this is a whole area to go through, and one wrong move can cost you all of your health. Just making it to the other side is a challenge, but to make matters worse, they put marbles in here, forcing you to take a much more dangerous path if you're going for 100%. I know it doesn't look that bad, but it's all because of this right here. I'm not the biggest fan of the N64 controller and its awkward shape, but the sensitivity of the analog stick makes this section so much harder. There's so little margin for error, and one slight tilt of the stick too far can cost you. And just like that, you have to start the level over. And don't think you can try to tank the damage and rush through either. I've been able to pull that off once or twice before, but it's not worth the risk if you ask me. Thankfully, you get to have your revenge on those rabbits once you descend down into the crypt, as they come at you in droves. The worst of this level is over, but we still have to head down into one more area of catacombs to take out some more rabbits and claim that medallion. I've been playing this game for so long that the sound of those rabbits spawning in still freaks me out. At low health, that's a sign that death might be close. Overall, Death Wormed Up is a stage with a great aesthetic, but there are so many rage-inducing areas that I have trouble enjoying it as much as I should. Once you scale this tower here, you'll find the entrance to the 4th and final fear stage, Boogie Nights of the Living Dead.
Wow, man, like a movie.
This level is more like a victory lap for completing Death Wormed Up. It's an incredibly small stage, and you can complete it in under 20 minutes if you know what you're doing, but it can be a lot of fun despite the length. This is the zombie dance club that the disco zombie kept mentioning in Death Wormed Up. Early on, you'll obtain this stage's special weapon, a psychedelic energy shot, which is powerful but has low ammo as it needs to frequently recharge. You'll be running around decapitating zombies, which then chase you in a pretty tense section, then running across light panels in the floor. This is also where you'll find those records with Evil the Cat on them, even though he was cut from the rest of the game. I kinda feel bad for the poor guy. Completing these sections makes speakers blow up, which somehow makes the music get louder. I don't really get it, but whatever. Jim can even run in the restroom here. Just don't go in the women's room.
Great, googly woogly!
Here you can find the disco zombie from earlier, but trying to flush him out opens a hole in the floor that leads to a river of toxic waste flowing under the dance club. You'll be attacked by speakers here, so use that first-person mode to your heart's content. That's about it for this stage. See, I told you it was short, but it's a fun time nonetheless, especially after getting through Death Wormed Up. But I'm sure you know what's up at this point. We have another boss to fight, and this time it's Professor Monkey for a head. I always get a laugh at how bad the model is for the Professor. It's like they made it in a day or two because they were under such a time crunch, and you know what, now that I say it, that's probably exactly what happened. There's not a whole lot to this fight that you haven't seen before. This fight does introduce these boosters that can shoot you ahead at high speed, but they don't really help to dodge the missiles, so more often than not, I don't even use them. The Professor can drop banana mines behind him, but they're not too hard to dodge, so use the same strategies as before, and soon enough, he'll be Professor Monkey for a dead. I'm sorry. That was terrible. This game's taken a toll on me, but we only have one world left to go. Jim's Fantasy. What could it be? Well, of course, it's a Wild West fantasy, because Jim is from Texas after all, and it wouldn't be a 90s 3D platformer without a Western level, would it? Bob the Killer Goldfish has taken over Jim's fantasies and turned all the residents into old people for some reason, and unlike Fear, there are only 2 levels this time, but they're some of the biggest and most expansive levels in the game. First up, we have Violent Death Valley, home to wide open areas connected by multiple doorways, so it's easy to lose your sense of direction here your first time through. The entirety of Fantasy only has one special weapon to offer, but it's a good one, an old-fashioned Western-style revolver. It's not all that flashy, but it sure is reliable. It packs a good amount of ammo and its shots move fast. Placing it up there with the homing rockets is one of my favorite weapons in the game. There's a lot of quicksand in these areas that you'll have to avoid, but you should be used to that by now. You'll be climbing around on ropes a lot here, all to get a good shot at these guys who fire at you from their outhouses, and once you kill them, the waterfalls disappear. I don't think that's quicksand. Moving swiftly on, you'll have to use first-person mode throughout this level to take out these grandmas who throw bombs at you from high above. The main mission involves Jim having to take an ice cream cone back to this old man baby at the beginning of the level. Thing is that as soon as you grab the ice cream, a swarm of bees start chasing you. They're fast too, so you have to speedrun yourself back to the beginning of the level before they eat all the ice cream. Great reward though, because while the next fridge narrowly misses hitting the old guy, the golden udder sure doesn't. My least favorite part of the level is a part where you have to painstakingly herd this group of grandmas into a pen for them to watch TV. As for why I hate it so much, have you ever played Beaver Bother in Donkey Kong 64? Now I know a few of you had your eyes start twitching just from me saying that, but imagine if the beavers you captured could escape. That's what this section is. Just getting one or two grandmas into the pen doesn't mean they'll stay there, and that's what makes this so annoying. You have a very limited amount of time to return to the pen, or the grandmas will start wandering off again. This can be pretty time consuming, and spoiler warning, you have to do it again in the next level, so you'd better get good at it now. Aside from that, Violent Death Valley also features the return of the fart rockets with this long vertical section, but if you did the one in Are You Hungry Tonight, then this is more of the same, with the same bad camera angles and tricky platforming. I think it's even harder here though, because the platforms feel even further apart than before. Anyway, that about does it for Violent Death Valley, so let's move on to the final area of the game. The good, the bad, and the elderly. Whereas Violent Death Valley felt like it took place mostly out in the desert, this level takes place entirely in a western town, so it doesn't feel quite as wide open. Lots of areas with a few buildings you can enter connected by long hallways. The gist here is that the sheriff has been imprisoned by a gang of gun-toting grandmas, and they're huge! When you shoot them enough times, they fall over and... I didn't need to see that. Anyway, as you're...
Don't show it again!
As I was saying, you'll need to collect the bingo balls they sometimes drop to earn another golden udder, and while you're exploring you can go into the different buildings for a few other side missions. I actually kinda like this level. It's just big enough to feel like it's fun to explore without feeling exhausting, and I kinda vibe with the whole western town aesthetic. I just wish there were more NPCs to talk to, because aside from the sheriff at the beginning, the grandmas are the only other characters here. We haven't seen established characters like Princess What's-Her-Name, the Evil Queen, or Evil Jim at all, and this is Jim's mind, so anything is possible. The lack of characters makes some of the levels feel really empty and sterile. Well, I guess you can count the bank manager who calls you near the end of the level. You have to run around to answer different phones scattered throughout the level in order to open the bank vault and get another udder, and some of the time limits here are really strict. There's also this mini-game where you have to ride an ice cube around a room without falling off, or you can just cheese it by jumping back onto the fridge. I love doing that. Of course, you have the repeat of herding the grandmas, which is even harder now because I swear you have less time than before to when they start wandering off again. There's also this evil bottle that doesn't show up until you shoot all the other bottles in the level. Look, there's nothing here, but if I go away and shoot the other ones, bam, there it is. That's some evil game design. Once you open the bank vault, you also get a stick of dynamite, which Jim gives to the sheriff so he can break out of the jail cell. Doesn't quite go according to plan though.
This town needs a sheriff.
But enough of this Wild West tomfoolery. We got one more boss to fight, and it's Bob the Killer Goldfish, riding on his trusted cat clone companion, number 4. This boss fight actually isn't that bad. Bob is fast, sure, but it's nothing you haven't seen in the past 3 fights. I've grown numb to these at this point, so I'm pretty sure I did this entire fight with my brain turned off. I just didn't care anymore. The lack of boss fight variety is one of the things that really hurts my enjoyment of this game. With Bob out of the way, it's time to move on to the endgame. Back in the brain and with all the udders, Peter Puppy drops down to reveal a hidden portal to the final boss. No more hesitation, let's finish this. I am so sick of riding on this stupid pig, but who could the final boss be? Is it Queen Slug for a butt? Or maybe Evil Jim? Nope, it's actually Earthworm Kim.
Who are you?
Yeah, Earthworm Kim.
What do you mean you haven't heard of her? Well, maybe it's because she's a completely brand new character who's never shown up in any Earthworm Jim media before this point.
In this, a game that takes place entirely within Jim's mind, where anything can happen, The most creative thing the devs could give us for the final boss is a gender-swapped version of the main character.
It definitely caught me by surprise. The first time I played this game, I would have put money on the final boss being Queen Slug for a Bud or Evil Jim, so I wasn't expecting this. But wait, it gets weirder.
Kim represents Jim's suppressed feminine side, with her plan being to defeat Jim in battle and take control of his mind, turning him into a feminine, cross-dressing earthworm with unlimited access to Jim's credit cards.
Where did this come from?
There's no dialogue or subtext in the game that drops any hints towards the final boss's identity, so this comes completely out of left field. The cartoon did have its moments of cross-dressing and innuendo, and there are compilations of those here on YouTube, but as someone who didn't watch the cartoon until well after I played the game, I had no idea what to make of this. I feel like they missed a golden opportunity for a joke here, as some earthworms actually do possess both male and female reproductive organs. They could have used this to explain why Jim's male and female sides are in conflict with each other, and they also could have mentioned this way earlier in the game to set Kim up as the antagonist. Maybe this is actually what the devs were referencing with this final boss, but that's pretty unlikely as it's not mentioned once in the entire game. I guess they were really banking on kids doing their earthworm research after playing. Well, like it or not, Kim's the final boss, and she's the worst boss in the game. The gimmick here is that every time you bump into Kim, you'll switch places, where she'll immediately start throwing out every marble you've collected. So that means you'll have to hurry up and bump into her again to switch back, all while making sure not to collect any marbles yourself as they'll go into her total, not yours. I consider this fight the most annoying in the game. I mean, the 4 other bosses aren't winning any awards either, but Kim is the best at dodging your missiles, so combine that with the switching mechanic and you have a fight that's guaranteed to cause some rage. My original strategy was to just watch the radar and stay away from her, but it's easy to get distracted grabbing marbles, and before you know it, Kim comes out of nowhere and bumps into you. Despite the annoyances, I tried my best to persevere, and eventually, Kim was no more. A bizarre final boss for one bizarre game. With Kim defeated, Peter Puppy appears in the elevator and tells Jim that he's about to wake up from his coma. After a moment of self-reflection, Jim proceeds into the elevator, or at least he tries to before the last fridge enters the chat. And here's the ending. A couple pictures of Jim waking up, and yep, there's a cow again. No surprise there.
So yeah, the ending's pretty lame, but at least I'm done. It's not like there's any extra content or anything in the game, right? I mean, look, I got everything. I'm done. There's nothing else, right?
Alright, there's something else. After beating the game, go to the mansion in fear and head to this door that wouldn't open before. Well, it opens now, and...
Earthworm Kim just took over the entire game.
That's right. If you 100% the game, you unlock Kim as a playable character. She has her own save slot and everything, but is there anything about playing as Kim that makes it different from the usual Jim playthrough? You know, aside from her being a different character and having a sped up version of Jim's voice as her own.
And it's a really big one!
Well, Kim is basically the hard mode of Earthworm Jim 3D, and playing as her will make everything you already did feel like a piece of cake in comparison. Playing as Kim is a test of mental fortitude and how far you're willing to go before you break. It's not fun, and I'll tell you exactly why. Earthworm Kim takes double the damage compared to the standard Jim playthrough. This means that enemies and hazards can kill you in around 3 to 4 hits. Enemies now have twice the amount of health as before, meaning that you'll be running out of ammo even faster now and having to run back to the vending machine twice as often. On top of that, health items now heal you for half the usual amount, and marbles don't heal you at all. This makes recovering health a lengthy process, and the slightest mistake can set you back a staggering amount. So in a nutshell, everything bad has been doubled, and everything good has been cut in half. You got that? Playing as Kim only exacerbates all of the problems I've commented on that plague Earthworm Jim 3D. You burn through your ammo twice as fast now, so you'd better get well acquainted with that vending machine, and healing can take forever, so much of your time will be spent farming enemies, only to recover a measly sliver of health. Remember how if you die, then all of your marbles reset and you have to do the whole level over again? Well, since Kim dies in only a few hits, getting anywhere near 100 marbles is near impossible, and a true test of determination. The game was clearly not play-tested with Kim, and there will be times where you'll be only a few marbles away from completion, only to die and have to start all over. Your heart will be racing the closer you get to completion, as one mistake can cost you everything when playing as Kim. It's for that reason I do not recommend trying to 100% the game as Kim. There's no reward aside from bragging rights, and it's not worth the frustration you'll have to endure to accomplish it. The farthest I got as a kid was Deathwormed Up, my old nemesis. I just couldn't do it. I'd get to the graveyard, and if I didn't die there, the rabbits underground would always finish me off. It just wasn't possible.
But that was around 15 years ago. And just for this video, I tried my hardest to buckle down and lock in as hard as I could. It took around a week of off and on frustration, but I 100%ed the game as Earthworm Kim.
Every marble, every udder. I am never doing this again. That's why so much of my Earthworm Kim footage is recorded off the N64. There's no way I was doing this again on PC. And the whole reason I did this, aside from proving to myself that I could, was to show that the final boss is Earthworm Jim, and they didn't update any of the dialogue, leading to funny lines like this. And this. And this. Oh, and they didn't change the voice lines either, so Jim still sounds like Kim.
Remember, Jimmy, it's for your own good.
I am so tired.
That's it, I'm done. I'm finally finished with Earthworm Jim 3D. I'm going back to my other backdrop now because I've had enough of the N64 for a while.
Earthworm Jim 3D is a tiring experience when going for 100%, and unless you really want to try playing as Earthworm Kim, I don't recommend doing so. With that said, playing through the game normally isn't as bad as people have made it out to be. It's by no means one of the all-time great 3D platformers, but there's still some fun to be had. The game does have some creative themes and level designs, and the awesome soundtrack does help to get through some of the more mundane sections. The game is hampered by its awful camera, which can take a long time to get used to, but if you can adapt, what you'll find is a completely middle-of-the-road platformer with a few fun levels, but not much else that makes it stand out. It doesn't help that the game rehashes so much of what made the first two Earthworm Jim games so memorable. This could have turned out so much better if not for the troubled development, but it also could have turned out even worse. The game is playable and fun in short bursts, but it's no wonder why this didn't make much of an impact on the gaming scene in 1999. As for myself, Earthworm Jim 3D remains kind of a guilty pleasure in my eyes. I don't love it like I do the first two games, but I still revisit it every now and then, especially around Halloween to play the fear levels. You can still have fun with it if you just play the game casually and don't try to 100% it. But by all means, go unlock Kim if you're feeling sadistic. If you want to play the game yourself, I only recommend the N64 version if you've got a setup with a CRT and you want that nostalgic feel, as the PC version outclasses it in every way. Higher resolution textures, much improved sound quality, more music tracks, it's just a better version overall. It's available on Steam, though I hear that version doesn't play the music correctly, so I'd recommend you get the GOG.com version, which is what I used for this video. It even comes with a download of the soundtrack, which is fine by me. No matter which version you play, you're sure to have some fun with it. It's not a horrible game like people have been saying. It's just okay.
But just okay wasn't good enough to keep the franchise going, and many people consider this to be the game that killed Earthworm Jim. Before anyone asks, I am aware of Earthworm Jim Menace to the Galaxy, the Game Boy Color game that launched around the same time as this one. I've never played it, and from what gameplay I've seen, it looks like it has nothing to do with the previous games or the cartoon series, and it doesn't really look that good. Maybe sometime in the future I'll get my own copy and give it a look, but I'm in no hurry for that.
In the over 25 years since Earthworm Jim 3D, not much has been done with the brand. There have been a few re-releases of the Genesis games, as well as Gameloft's Earthworm Jim HD, but every major attempt to revive the franchise seems to fall apart. A new game with some of the original developers on board was announced for the PSP in 2007 with some pretty rough-looking gameplay, but this would be cancelled the same year. The announcement of an Earthworm Jim 4 by the original dev team for the ill-fated Intellivision Amico console was met with skepticism and excitement, but we all know how that panned out, and the game likely never got farther than this initial test animation. Then there was that TV show pitch from a few years back that looked interesting but never went anywhere. At least I think it didn't. Haven't heard any news on it in forever. The only tangible things to come out of the franchise in recent years have been a series of comic books from original creator Doug TenNapel, and some sporadic merchandise like the recent figures from Premium DNA, which look great but are of varying quality.
Will there ever be a new Earthworm Jim game? At this point I highly doubt it, but most Earthworm Jim fans have resigned themselves to that fact, and instead continue to focus on the handful of games we do have.
The first two are some of the best platformers of the 16-bit generation, and they're just as fun to play now as they were in 1995. As for Earthworm Jim 3D, it's far from a perfect game, but if you're a fan of early 3D platformers, especially the ones made by Rareware, you might actually enjoy it, and I don't think it deserves quite as negative a reputation as it has currently.
Now that I've reviewed the Earthworm Jim trilogy, so ends my own trilogy of Earthworm Jim videos. I'm proud to have finally covered this series that I enjoyed so much growing up, and I hope I've introduced at least a few of you to it, as they're definitely worth playing. Even Earthworm Jim 3D, which, while not as good as 1 or 2, still has its own merits as a 3D platformer. Thank you all for joining me for this nostalgic look back at the Earthworm Jim series. I'll be back in the future for some more videos, but for now I think I'm gonna go make myself a chip buddy. Without lettuce this time. It gets your health to 200%. I'll see you all in the next video here on RampagingRex Productions. See you next time.